Brent Hughes was 42 years old and worked as a senior compliance analyst at Whitestone Freight Systems in downtown Chicago. Most people in the building believed he was exactly what he looked like: quiet, forgettable, and finally out of chances. He drove a faded silver Ford Fusion with rust near the rear wheel. He carried the same cracked leather briefcase every day. He drank cheap black coffee from the break room machine and wrote notes by hand, while everyone else carried tablets. What they didn't know was that 3 hours earlier, Whitestone's board of directors had voted unanimously to make Brent Hughes the new chairman of the company. Behind the frosted glass doors ahead of him, champagne corks exploded. Someone laughed loud enough for the hallway to hear. Then Brent reached for the handle and pushed the door open. Before we continue, comment your country and local time below. I always like seeing where these stories are being watched from. And if you enjoy slow burn revenge stories built on patience, evidence, and quiet power, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's story gets even colder. Whitestone Freight Systems occupied 34 floors of mirrored glass overlooking the Chicago River. The company moved refrigerated cargo, medical supplies, and industrial freight across 48 states. Annual revenue sat just above $2.7 billion. The executives liked repeating that number during quarterly meetings. Most employees only cared about appearances: corner offices, watches, parking spaces, expense accounts. Brent Hughes had none of those things. His cubicle sat on the 26th floor, beside a support column that blocked half the natural light. Cubicle 48, B, Operations Compliance Division. The carpet near his desk had a faint coffee stain, maintenance never fully removed. Every morning, Brent arrived at 6:10 a.m. Not 6 o'clock, not 6:15, 6:10. The security guards downstairs knew him better than most executives did. "Morning, Mr. Hughes," said Luis at the front desk one Tuesday. Brent nodded once. Morning, same routine every day. Badge swipe, elevator. Black coffee from the third floor break room because the machine on 26 always tasted burnt. Then silence. He reviewed freight manifests while the rest of the office slowly woke up around him. At 8:40, Tyler Grant arrived loud enough for half the floor to hear him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tyler announced while walking past the cubicles, "the prodigal salesman has returned from Detroit alive." A few employees laughed automatically. Tyler was Whitestone's vice president of sales. 38 years old, expensive suits, white teeth, loud confidence that filled rooms before he even entered them. He tossed his car keys onto his desk hard enough to make a stapler jump. Brent, Tyler called out, "You still auditing humanity over there?" Brent looked up briefly from his monitor. "Morning, Tyler." "That's depressing," Tyler said. "You know that, right?" More laughter. Brent returned to the spreadsheet without responding. People interpreted silence however they wanted. Most assumed weakness. At 9 o'clock, sharp Derek Holloway crossed the operations floor with Rachel Whitmore walking beside him. The mood changed instantly. Derek carried authority the way some men carried weapons, visibly and on purpose. Tall, perfect posture, tailored navy suit, controlled smile. As chief operating officer, he rarely spoke above conversational volume. He did not need to. Employees adjusted themselves when he walked by. Monitors changed screens. Conversations died mid-sentence. Rachel Whitmore matched him perfectly. Whitestone's HR director, dressed in expensive neutral colors and spoke with polished warmth that never reached her eyes. She remembered birthdays, office gossip, divorces, and weaknesses with equal efficiency. Derek slowed near Brent's cubicle. "You still reviewing route sector invoices?" he asked casually. Brent nodded once. "There are inconsistencies in vendor approvals from Q2. Tyler leaned back in his chair nearby. "See," Tyler said loudly to a sales coordinator. "This is what I mean. The guy dreams in spreadsheets." A few people laughed again. Derek smiled faintly. "Try not to get buried in details, Brent. Operations requires flexibility. Flexibility shouldn't change invoice routing numbers, Brent replied calmly. The air shifted slightly, very small, but noticeable. Derek's smile held for another second too long. Then he moved on. Rachel followed beside him without looking back. By noon, the office returned to its normal rhythm. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, freight disputes, shipment delays from Milwaukee due to freezing rain. Brent ate lunch alone at his desk. Turkey sandwich, apple, no chips. He reviewed vendor payment logs while chewing slowly. 3 months earlier, Whitestone had migrated freight contracts into a new internal platform called AtlasNet. The system centralized vendor approvals, fuel adjustments, route scheduling, and reimbursement processing. Most employees hated it. Brent liked systems. Systems left patterns, and patterns left trails. At 1:17 p.m., Brent noticed something strange. Vendor code, MTS-441, Midwest Transit Solutions, LLC. Approved payment $184,220. Nothing unusual at first glance. But the routing number attached to the payment looked familiar. Brent opened another invoice, then another. Different vendor names, different states, same routing number. He stopped chewing. Around him, the office continued moving without noticing anything. Someone laughed near the printers. Tyler argued loudly about a client dinner reservation. A junior analyst dropped a stack of folders. Brent zoomed into the payment records again. 3 vendors, different tax IDs. Same banking destination. That should not happen accidentally. He opened AtlasNet's approval history. Every transaction had passed through executive override authorization. Level 7 clearance, operations division, Derek Holloway's office. Brent leaned back slightly, not emotionally, just enough to think clearly. Most people panicked when something felt wrong. Brent became quieter. At 3:40 p.m., Rachel Whitmore stopped near his desk carrying a tablet. "You missed the employee engagement survey again," she said lightly. "I was working." "You're always working." Brent looked at her. Rachel smiled politely, but there was measurement behind it. Whitestone rewarded visibility, networking, presentation. Brent did none of those things. No golf outings, no rooftop happy hours, no executive lunches. People distrusted quiet men in buildings full of performers. Rachel glanced at his monitor. "You're still reviewing freight vendors?" "Yes." "You know operations already signed off on those." "I know." Something unreadable crossed her expression for half a second. Then it vanished. "Well," she said, "try not to stay too late tonight." She walked away in heels sharp enough to echo across the floor. Brent watched the monitor again. 3 vendors, 1 routing number. He opened state registration records through the compliance portal. First company, registered in Delaware. Second company, registered in Delaware. Third company, same registered agent, same Wilmington address, Suite 214, a building known for mailbox corporations. Brent's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. Outside the windows, Chicago traffic thickened under fading gray light. Snow drifted lightly against the glass 30 floors above Wacker Drive. At 6:12 p.m., most employees had gone home. Tyler left laughing with 2 account managers. Rachel exited carrying designer shopping bags. Derek disappeared into the executive elevator reserved for upper management. Brent remained in cubicle 48B. The operations floor dimmed automatically into evening power mode. Computer screens glowed across empty desks. He opened one final invoice, then another, then another. The numbers aligned too perfectly. Duplicate fuel surcharges, artificial freight delays, layered vendor approvals, millions spread across transactions small enough to avoid automatic audit triggers. Not sloppy. Careful, professional, which made it worse. Brent removed his glasses slowly and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Then he opened a blank yellow legal pad from his desk drawer and wrote 4 words in neat block letters. Follow the approval chain. Downstairs, a snowplow scraped loudly across Lower Wacker. Up on the 26th floor, Brent highlighted one final transaction: approval override D. Holloway. He stared at the name for several quiet seconds. Then Brent printed the records and slipped them carefully into his old leather briefcase. As he shut off his monitor, he noticed something else. A fourth vendor had just appeared in AtlasNet. New entry, uploaded 11 minutes earlier. Different company name, different state, same routing number. Brent Hughes returned to Whitestone Freight Systems at 5:58 the next morning. The lobby lights were still dimmed for overnight energy settings. Outside, Chicago wore the color of dirty steel. Snow rested along the sidewalks beside Wacker Drive, while early traffic crawled through freezing slush. Luis at the front desk looked up from his coffee. "You sleep here now," he joked quietly. "Not yet," Brent replied. Luis smiled faintly. "Give it time." Brent took the elevator to the 26th floor alone. The building sounded different before sunrise. No conversations, no ringing phones, only ventilation systems and distant electrical hums hidden inside walls. He preferred it that way. At 6:07 a.m., Brent unlocked Cubicle 4, 8B, and placed his leather briefcase carefully beside the desk. He removed the printed invoices from the night before and arranged them into neat stacks. Vendor records, approval logs, bank routing confirmations. He opened AtlasNet and began tracing the fourth vendor added overnight, North Ridge Logistics Group, registered in Nevada. No operating history before 6 months ago, no transportation licensing records, no employee payroll filings. Yet Whitestone had already approved $2.3 million in freight reimbursements through the company. Brent typed slowly, methodically. Most analysts search for obvious fraud, large transfers, missing money. Brent searched for behavior, people repeated habits even when hiding crimes. At 6:42 a.m., he cross-referenced the vendor tax documents with federal business registration databases. The address appeared legitimate at first glance. Then he noticed the suite number. Suite 880. Same building as another vendor from the previous quarter. Different floor. Same registered agent. A corporate formation attorney in Wilmington named Peter Vance. Brent wrote the name down, then circled it once. By 7:30, the operations floor began filling with employees. Computer monitors flickered awake across rows of cubicles. Coffee smell spread through the department. Someone cursed quietly at the printer near accounting. Brent barely noticed. He had moved deeper into the approval chains now. AtlasNet tracked every action automatically. Timestamps user credentials, authorization levels, revision history. Systems always remembered what people forgot. At 8:11 a.m., Brent found the first impossible timestamp. One freight contract showed executive approval from Derek Holloway's account at 2:14 a.m. 3 weeks earlier. Except Derek had been speaking at a logistics conference in Dallas at that exact time. Whitestone's internal newsletter even included photographs from the event. Brent enlarged the approval metadata: remote access terminal, VPN authorization override. Someone had used Derek's credentials, or Derek had allowed someone else to. Neither option improved the situation. Tyler Grant arrived 20 minutes later carrying a Starbucks tray and talking loudly into wireless earbuds. "No, listen to me," Tyler said while walking across the floor. "If Cleveland wants priority lanes next quarter, they pay premium rates. I'm done babysitting cheap clients." He disconnected the call and noticed Brent immediately. "You know what your problem is?" Tyler asked while setting coffees onto nearby desks. Brent kept typing. "I assume you'll tell me. You look at life like it's a math equation." Tyler leaned against the cubicle wall. "People don't follow rules, Brent. That's why guys like me exist. A sales coordinator nearby laughed automatically. Brent clicked open another vendor file. "Rules exist because people like you exist," he said calmly. The laughter stopped. Tyler's smile tightened slightly. For a second, something colder appeared underneath his polished confidence. Then he laughed loudly again. "See, that's what I mean. You should put that on a motivational poster." He walked away. Brent continued reviewing approval logs without reacting, but he noticed something important. Tyler had looked nervous, not offended, nervous. At 9 o'clock sharp, the weekly operations meeting began inside Conference Room C. 22 employees, glass walls, long walnut table, digital projection screen displaying quarterly freight metrics. Derek Holloway stood near the front, beside a slide labeled Regional Expansion Strategy, Q4. His voice remained smooth and controlled. Denver capacity increased 12%. Medical transport margins remained strong despite fuel pressure. Client retention is stable. Brent sat near the far end of the table taking handwritten notes. Tyler scrolled through his phone beside him. Rachel Whitmore entered halfway through carrying a tablet and sat beside Derek. Then Derek changed slides. A chart appeared showing compliance review delays. Brent recognized the numbers immediately. His department. Derek folded his hands casually. "One issue we need to address," he said, "is operational slowdown caused by excessive internal review procedures." Nobody spoke. Derek looked directly at Brent. Some employees struggled to understand the difference between diligence and obstruction. A few nervous smiles appeared around the table. Tyler leaned back comfortably. Derek continued. "When freight sits unresolved because someone is chasing imaginary accounting conspiracies," clients notice. More smiles. Brent remained still. Derek walked slowly around the table. "We are a logistics company, not a courtroom." Rachel nodded slightly as if the statement carried wisdom. Brent closed his notebook carefully. Then he spoke. "Would you like the routing numbers?" The room went quiet. Derek stopped walking. Brent's voice stayed level. "I found 4 vendors sharing identical banking destinations despite separate registrations and approval paths." Nobody moved. Tyler stared at him now. No smiling. Derek recovered first. "Brent," he said calmly, "if you have procedural concerns, there are channels for that." "I'm aware." "Then perhaps avoid dramatic accusations during operations meetings." Brent looked directly at the projection screen. "I didn't make an accusation." Silence settled heavily across the room. Rachel Whitmore finally intervened with practiced warmth. "I think everyone's stress levels are high right now," she said. "Let's focus on solutions instead of tension. Classic HR language. Reduce facts into emotions." Derek smiled faintly again. "Yes," he said. "Agreed." Then he changed the slide and continued the meeting as if nothing had happened. But the room had changed. Employees avoided looking at Brent now, not because they disliked him, because people sensed danger before they understood it. At 11:46 a.m., Brent returned to his cubicle and found an envelope resting beside his keyboard. No postage. Hand-delivered. His name typed neatly across the front. Inside sat a single card. "Call this number immediately. EMSA Carter." Below it was a Boston phone number. Brent stared at it for several seconds. Then he placed the card inside his desk drawer without reacting outwardly. At 1:15 p.m., he used an empty conference room on the 19th floor to make the call privately. The woman answered on the second ring. "Evelyn Carter speaking. My name is Brent Hughes." "I know." Her voice carried the clipped precision of someone who billed by the hour. "You've been reviewing vendor irregularities connected to Whitestone operations." Brent looked through the conference room glass toward snowy rooftops beyond downtown Chicago. "Yes." "How much have you documented?" "Enough to know it isn't accidental." A brief silence followed. Then Evelyn spoke carefully. "Mr. Hughes, I represent several members of Whitestone's board of directors. Brent said nothing. The board has received concerns before she continued. But concerns are not evidence. And now Evelyn said someone finally brought numbers. Brent's expression did not change, but his grip tightened slightly around the phone. What happens next, he asked. That depends on how far you're willing to go. Outside the conference room, employees walked past carrying coffees and laptops, unaware that Whitestone's foundation had already begun cracking beneath them. Evelyn's voice lowered slightly. If you continue this, we'll become hostile very quickly. Brent looked down at his handwritten notes spread across the table. Vendor names, routing numbers, approval chains, facts, not opinions. Facts survived pressure better than people did. I understand, he said quietly. Good, Evelyn replied, because someone already knows you're looking. The line went silent for half a second. Then she added one final sentence, and they're moving faster now. The next morning, Brent Hughes noticed the change before anyone spoke to him. It started with small things. People lowered their voices when he walked past. Conversations stopped half a second too late. A project manager from procurement avoided sharing an elevator with him entirely. Corporate buildings behaved like nervous ecosystems. Fear spread faster than facts. At 7:05 a.m., Brent entered Cubicle 4 8B and found his system access running slower than usual. AtlasNet loaded in fragments. Several vendor files now required secondary authorization. That had not happened yesterday. Brent sat quietly for a moment studying the screen. Then he opened his notebook and wrote, Access modified, after board contact, no emotion, just observation. At 8:18, Rachel Whitmore appeared beside his desk, carrying a paper coffee cup and her usual polished smile. Morning, Brent. Morning. She glanced toward his monitor. You've been working very hard lately. I have responsibilities. Rachel nodded sympathetically the way HR directors practiced in mirrors. I wanted to check in because Derek mentioned some concerns. Brent looked up slowly. What concerns? Rachel lowered her voice slightly. There's a perception issue developing, meaning you've been questioning executive approvals aggressively. I've been documenting irregularities. That language, Rachel said gently, is exactly the problem. Around them, employees pretended not to listen while listening carefully. Rachel rested one hand against the cubicle wall. Whitestone values collaboration, Brent. People are starting to feel targeted. Brent noticed the wording immediately. Not inaccurate, not incorrect, just uncomfortable. He folded his hands calmly. If financial records are accurate, nobody is being targeted. Rachel's smile faded almost invisibly. Not everything is solved through technicalities. No, Brent replied. Some things are solved through records. Silence. Rachel straightened slightly. Well, she said I'm advising you professionally to stop escalating this. The statement landed softly, but not accidentally. Brent watched her walk away through rows of cubicles filled with carefully neutral employees. Then he turned back toward his monitor. At 9:42 a.m., he discovered 3 archived invoices had disappeared from AtlasNet entirely. Deleted, not hidden, removed. Brent checked the deletion logs, administrative override, executive credentials, timestamp 8:03 a.m. He printed the access report immediately. By noon, the office atmosphere had become noticeably colder. Tyler Grant performed loudly for nearby employees, but even he watched Brent more carefully now. At one point, Brent passed the sales bullpen and heard Tyler mutter, "Guy thinks he's uncovering Watergate." Several people laughed, but not comfortably. Brent kept walking. At 1:10 p.m., his phone vibrated. Unknown Boston number, Evelyn Carter. This line secure, she asked immediately. It should be. That's not an answer. Brent glanced around the empty stairwell where he had taken the call. No, he said. Good. Assume nothing inside Whitestone is private anymore. Her tone carried no drama, only experience. Evelyn continued, "The board reviewed preliminary materials last night, and your executives are either corrupt or catastrophically incompetent." Brent leaned against the concrete wall beside the stairwell window. Snow drifted slowly outside across downtown Chicago rooftops. "What happens now?" he asked. "There's a reason I'm calling directly instead of through corporate channels," Evelyn replied. "The board believes internal reporting structures may be compromised." Brent thought briefly of Rachel. The slowed system access, the deleted invoices, the sudden hostility. "They know I reported concerns," he said. "Yes." How pause. Then Evelyn answered carefully. "Your HR director contacted Derek Holloway within 37 minutes of your compliance filing." Brent closed his eyes briefly, not from shock, confirmation. That was worse. He had suspected the chain was compromised. Now he knew. "Can you prove it?" he asked. "We can prove metadata, not intent." "No," Evelyn admitted. "Not yet." Brent looked through the stairwell glass at the frozen river below. Cars crawled through traffic like mechanical insects under gray skies. "Mr. Hughes," Evelyn said quietly, "I need you to understand something very clearly." He listened. "If senior leadership realizes the board is involved, they will move aggressively against me." "Yes?" Brent nodded once to himself. The strange thing was that fear never arrived all at once for men like him. It arrived in measurements, system delays, missing files, changed behavior. Fear became real through details. "When do you need an answer?" he asked. "For what testifying?" Evelyn was silent briefly. "Tonight." After the call ended, Brent remained in the stairwell for another minute. Then he returned upstairs. At 2:25 p.m., Derek Holloway stepped onto the operations floor unexpectedly. No assistant, no entourage. That alone drew attention. Derek stopped beside Brent's cubicle with controlled casualness. "Walk with me, not a request." Employees pretended to work while tracking every movement. Brent followed Derek toward the executive conference corridor overlooking the river. The hallway carpet softened footsteps. Framed company awards lined the walls. Top Midwest Logistics Provider, Supply Chain Excellence Award, Transport Safety Leadership, Polished Achievements covering rotten infrastructure. Derek entered a small conference room and closed the glass door behind them. For several seconds, he simply studied Brent. Then he smiled faintly. "You know, Derek said I used to think you were harmless." Brent remained standing. Derek loosened his cuff slightly. "You're smart, thorough, but men like you usually understand hierarchy. I understand systems. That's the same thing." "No," Brent replied calmly. "It isn't." Derek's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. The COO walked toward the windows overlooking the river. "Do you know how many people depend on Whitestone?" he asked. Brent said nothing. "Drivers? Warehouse workers? Families? Entire distribution chains." Derek turned back toward him. "One irresponsible accusation can damage all of that. I haven't accused anyone, but you're trying very hard to." Brent noticed Derek never denied the invoices, never addressed the routing numbers, only the consequences of discussing them. That mattered. Derek stepped closer. "Here's my advice," he said quietly. "Drop this." Brent held his gaze. If the records are legitimate, there's nothing to worry about. The silence stretched longer this time. Cold now. No performance left. Finally, Derek smiled again, but without warmth. "You know what your real problem is?" Brent, "No." "You think being correct protects you." Derek opened the conference room door. The meeting was over. Or the warning was. Back at cubicle 48B, Brent found another problem waiting. His access to archived executive approvals had been revoked entirely. Permission denied. He tried secondary login credentials, blocked. Within minutes, an internal email arrived from HR System Access Review in Progress. Standard security procedure. Brent read the message twice, then printed it. At 5:40 p.m., most employees left for the evening, while Brent remained at his desk reviewing paper copies instead of digital files now. The office lights dimmed gradually around him. Outside, snow thickened against the glass. His phone vibrated again. Evelyn Carter. "Can you meet tomorrow night?" she asked immediately. "Where? The Blackstone Hotel, private conference suite. Who will be there?" 2 board members. Brent looked down at the invoices spread across his desk. Millions hidden inside ordinary freight transactions. "So the board believes me now?" "No," Evelyn replied evenly. "They believe the numbers." Brent almost respected that answer. "Bring every document you have," she continued. "And Mr. Hughes?" "Yes?" "You should assume they're preparing something against you already." The line disconnected. Brent sat motionless for several seconds. Then he opened his desk drawer and removed a second legal pad. Across the top page, he wrote carefully, "If they move this fast, they're afraid." At 6:12 p.m., he shut down his monitor and locked the printed records inside his briefcase. As he stood to leave, he noticed someone across the darkened operations floor. Sophia Bennett, junior accounting analyst, 26 years old, quiet, usually invisible to executives. She stood beside the printer, clutching a folder tightly against her chest. When Brent looked toward her, she hesitated. Then she spoke barely above a whisper. "They deleted more files this afternoon." Brent stayed still. Sophia glanced nervously toward the executive offices. "You were right," she said. Then she walked away quickly before he could answer. By Thursday morning, Whitestone Freight Systems no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like surveillance. Brent Hughes noticed it immediately after stepping off the elevator onto the 26th floor. 2 conversations stopped when he approached. A procurement analyst quickly minimized her screen. Someone near the sales bullpen whispered his name, not openly, carefully, like people discussing smoke before seeing flames. Brent walked to cubicle 48B, carrying the same worn leather briefcase and paper coffee cup as always. His pace never changed. Neither did his expression. But the office around him had changed completely. At 7:18 a.m., his phone chimed with a calendar notification. Mandatory HR performance review. Friday 9 a.m., conference room 31-C. No explanation attached. Brent stared at the screen for several quiet seconds. Then he printed the meeting notice and placed it inside a folder labeled Timeline. Across the aisle, Tyler Grant watched him openly now. Tyler spun slowly in his chair, holding an energy drink. "Performance review," he called out loudly. "Damn, Brent, you finally murder somebody in accounting." A few scattered laughs followed, forced. People sensed danger now, even if they did not understand it yet. Brent sat down without responding. Tyler smirked at the silence. "That's okay," he continued. "HR only schedules those when things are going really well." Rachel Whitmore appeared moments later near the copier area. She heard the comment, did not correct it. That mattered too. Brent opened AtlasNet again. More restrictions. Entire approval histories had vanished overnight. Vendor access logs removed. Archived timestamps unavailable. Someone was cleaning aggressively now. But rushed people made mistakes, and desperate people repeated patterns. At 8:42 a.m., Brent found one. A reimbursement approval tied to Midwest Transit Solutions contained a secondary payment attachment accidentally left active inside the system. He opened it carefully. PDF invoice. Consulting services. Approved amount $742,000. No consulting description attached. No project code. Only one signature authorization remained visible before deletion protocols interrupted the file. T. Grant. Brent leaned back slowly. Outside his cubicle, the office moved through artificial normalcy. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Tyler laughed too loudly near the sales area, but underneath the routine pressure had started cracking through the structure. Brent printed the invoice immediately. Then another detail caught his attention. The destination account connected to the reimbursement matched a smaller vendor tied to Derek Holloway's brother-in-law. Same Chase business routing origin. Layered transfers. Multiple shells feeding one channel? He wrote carefully on his legal pad, Tyler involved directly. At 10:15 a.m., Sophia Bennett approached his desk carrying a stack of accounting folders. She stopped beside him without making eye contact. "You should check archived fuel adjustments for March," she said quietly. Then she placed the folders down and walked away before Brent could answer. Inside the folder sat 3 photocopied transaction summaries. No notes, no explanations. But Brent immediately understood why she had brought them. The fuel adjustment percentages were mathematically impossible. Several freight routes showed fuel surcharges exceeding actual diesel market rates by almost 30%. Artificial inflation. Tiny percentages multiplied across hundreds of shipments. Millions hidden inside decimal points. Brent reviewed the numbers carefully while the office buzzed around him. At 11:03 a.m., Derek Holloway entered the operations floor again. This time he came directly toward Brent. "Conference room," Derek said. No greeting. Brent followed him without speaking. Inside the room, Derek closed the glass door and stood near the windows overlooking the river. Snow melted slowly against the glass under weak sunlight. Derek folded his arms. "You've created tension inside my departments." Brent remained standing near the table. "The records created the tension." Derek smiled faintly. "You really believe this ends well for you?" "I believe numbers matter." "No," Derek replied quietly. "You believe process matters." The COO walked toward the conference table slowly. "That's the difference between us." Brent noticed something important then. Derek looked tired, not physically, strategically, like a man calculating too many moving parts at once. "You know what happens to companies during public investigations?" Derek asked. "Depends on the investigation. Banks panic, clients disappear, employees lose jobs." He leaned forward slightly. "You think you're protecting Whitestone? But men like you destroy companies while pretending to save them." Brent held his gaze calmly. "If the company collapses because records become public, the records aren't the problem." For the first time, Derek's composure cracked visibly, only for a second, but Brent saw it. A flash of anger behind the executive calm, then it vanished again. Derek straightened his tie. "You should start preparing yourself," he said softly. "For what? For consequences." The meeting ended there. Back at Cubicle 48B, Brent discovered his employee badge no longer opened several compliance archive rooms. Restricted access. Temporary authorization review. Again. By lunchtime, rumors had spread openly throughout the office. Some employees believed Brent was under investigation. Others believed he was being fired quietly. Tyler encouraged both versions depending on who he spoke to. At 1:40 p.m., Brent passed the break room and overheard Tyler speaking near the vending machines. "I'm telling you, Tyler said corporate's done with him. Guy spent 20 years acting like a hall monitor." Someone laughed nervously. "He probably reports jaywalking to the police, too." More laughter. Then Tyler lowered his voice slightly. "Honestly, Derek should have gotten rid of him years ago." Brent kept walking without reacting, but he memorized every word, not emotionally, procedurally. At 3:15 p.m., Evelyn Carter called again. "Do not use company Wi-Fi," she said immediately. "I'm not." "Good. We confirmed internal monitoring escalated yesterday afternoon." Brent sat alone inside a vacant training room overlooking Lower Michigan Avenue traffic. "They're locking systems down," he said. "We expected that." I found Tyler connected to reimbursement approvals. Silence, then typing sounds from Evelyn's side. Can you prove it? Yes. Bring hard copies tomorrow night. Brent looked through the glass wall at employees walking past carrying laptops and coffee cups. Normal people inside abnormal systems. What happens if they terminate me first? He asked. Evelyn answered immediately. They probably will. Brent absorbed the sentence without visible reaction. We anticipated retaliation, she continued. That's why documentation matters. And if they destroy the remaining files, they can delete systems, Evelyn said, not timelines. That sentence stayed with him after the call ended. At 5:52 p.m., the office emptied gradually for the evening. Sophia Bennett remained at her desk near accounting, visibly anxious. Tyler left laughing with two sales managers. Rachel departed carrying a garment bag and talking on Bluetooth headphones. Derek stayed upstairs in executive offices. Brent continued organizing evidence. Invoice chains, approval records, access modifications, deleted file timestamps. At 6:34 p.m., he finally shut his monitor down and placed the documents carefully inside his briefcase. Then his desk phone rang. Internal extension. Unknown number. Brent answered calmly. Compliance. Silence. Then a male voice spoke quietly. You should stop digging. Brent said nothing. You think the board protects people? The voice continued. It doesn't. Click. Line dead. Brent lowered the receiver slowly. No panic. Just another data point. He packed the remaining files carefully and stood to leave. As he walked toward the elevators, he noticed something waiting beside the security desk near the lobby. A cardboard box. His name written across the side in black marker. Brent Hughes. Inside sat framed family photographs from his cubicle, office supplies, a coffee mug, his winter gloves. Employees nearby pretended not to look at him. Brent stared at the box silently. Then he noticed the envelope taped to the top. Human Resources. Inside was a single printed notice. Final Employment Review. Friday 9 a.m. Below it sat Rachel Whitmore's electronic signature, and beneath that one final line. Security access, subject to termination procedures. Friday morning arrived gray and bitterly cold. Wind pushed hard against the Chicago River, rattling loose ice along the concrete edges below Wacker Drive. Downtown traffic crawled through wet snow while office workers hurried beneath umbrellas and coffee steam. Brent Hughes arrived at Whitestone Freight Systems at 8:11 a.m., earlier than usual. Not because he hoped to save his job, because he wanted time. Louis stood behind the security desk downstairs, watching him approach with visible discomfort. Morning, Mr. Hughes. Morning. Louis hesitated, then quietly slid a small folded paper across the desk. Your badge access changed again at 6:30. Brent unfolded the paper. Limited floor access temp status. He nodded once. Thanks. Louis lowered his voice. They already brought security upstairs. Brent looked toward the elevator bank. Two unfamiliar men in gray jackets stood near the executive elevators, pretending not to watch anyone. Corporate security contractors, not building staff. Prepared in advance. That mattered. Brent entered elevator C alone. The mirrored walls reflected the same dark wool coat, same tired leather briefcase, same unreadable expression employees had ignored for years. Nothing about him looked dangerous. That had always been their mistake. At 8:18 a.m., he reached the 26th floor. The silence hit immediately. Nobody greeted him. Several employees looked away too quickly. Tyler Grant stood near the sales bullpen, stirring coffee dramatically while pretending not to stare. Rachel Whitmore emerged from HR carrying a tablet, professional smile already prepared. Brent, she said warmly, will begin shortly. He nodded once. No argument, no visible anger. That unsettled people more than panic would have. At 8:31 a.m., Brent sat quietly at cubicle 48B, organizing the final evidence copies inside his briefcase. 3 document sets, one for the board, one for outside counsel, one sealed backup packet already stored elsewhere. He checked each stack carefully. Vendor trails, deletion logs, approval histories, unauthorized reimbursements, executive overrides. Facts survived better when duplicated. Across the aisle, 2 junior analysts whispered near the printers. "You think he's suing? No idea. I heard he accessed executive files. My friend in HR said they've been building a case for weeks." Brent continued sorting papers without reacting. Truth rarely arrived louder than rumors. At 8:52 a.m., Rachel approached again. "We're ready?" Brent stood. The operations floor watched quietly as he followed Rachel toward conference room, 31-C at the far end of the executive corridor. Glass walls, polished walnut table, city skyline behind floor-to-ceiling windows, everything designed to make power look clean. Inside the room sat Derek Holloway and a corporate security representative Brent had never seen before. A thick folder rested neatly beside Rachel's tablet. Prepared termination packet. Derek leaned back calmly in his chair. "Please sit, Brent." He did. Rachel folded her hands with rehearsed sympathy. This meeting concerns violations of internal compliance conduct and unauthorized systems activity. Brent listened silently. Rachel opened the folder. Over the past several weeks, multiple employees reported disruptive behavior, improper escalation tactics, and attempts to access restricted executive records outside normal workflow. She slid several printed pages across the table. Brent glanced down. Employee complaints, performance warnings, behavioral concerns, most dated within the last 10 days, manufactured quickly, carelessly. Derek spoke next. "You've created instability across departments, Brent." "No," Brent replied calmly. "The records created instability." Derek ignored the statement. Rachel continued reading. "Additionally, evidence suggests repeated violations of collaborative workplace standards." Brent almost admired the language. So polished, so empty. Not a single accusation tied directly to financial evidence, because real accusations created legal exposure. Vague language protected cowards. Rachel slid another document forward. "Effective immediately, Whitestone Freight Systems is terminating your employment." Silence settled across the room. Outside the glass walls, employees pretended not to watch. Brent looked at the termination letter carefully, then at the timestamp. Prepared yesterday at 2:14 p.m., before the final HR review even officially existed. Again pre-decided, again documented. He placed the paper back onto the table. "What specifically am I being terminated for?" he asked. Rachel exchanged a brief glance with Derek. "Loss of organizational trust." "Define that." Derek's patience thinned slightly. "You know exactly why this is happening." "Yes," Brent replied. "I do." The room cooled noticeably. Rachel regained control first. "Your system access is revoked effective immediately. Security will escort you after the meeting." Brent nodded once. Then he asked the question Derek clearly did not expect. "Will I receive written confirmation that executive approval records were altered after my compliance submission?" Silence. Derek stared at him. Rachel's posture tightened. "That allegation is inappropriate," she said carefully. "It wasn't an allegation." Brent folded his hands calmly on the table. It was a time-stamp question. No one answered. That mattered too. The corporate security contractor shifted awkwardly near the wall. Even he sensed something underneath the meeting now, something unfinished. Derek finally leaned forward. "You need to understand something, Brent." His voice lowered. "This company cannot function with employees who mistake paranoia for integrity." Brent met his eyes steadily. And companies cannot survive executives who mistake authority for immunity. For the first time since the meeting began, genuine anger crossed Derek's face. Brief, controlled, but real. Rachel intervened immediately. "We're done here." She pushed the final paperwork toward Brent. "Please sign acknowledgement of receipt." Brent read the document fully before touching the pen. Not emotional, procedural. He signed only the acknowledgement line, nothing else. Then he stood. The security contractor stepped closer automatically. Brent picked up his old leather briefcase. Derek watched him carefully now, not confidently anymore. Carefully. As Brent reached the door, Derek spoke again. "You spent 20 years here," he said quietly, "and this is what you leave behind." Brent looked back once. "No," he replied calmly. "This is what you built." Then he walked out. The operations floor fell nearly silent as Brent crossed between cubicles for the last time. Employees stared at monitors without reading them. Tyler Grant stood beside the break room, holding coffee, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Well," Tyler called out loudly, guest compliance finally audited itself. A few nervous laughs followed, weak ones. Brent kept walking. Near the elevator, Sophia Bennett stood frozen beside accounting. She looked like she wanted to speak, but fear held her still. Brent gave the slightest nod before stepping into the elevator. The doors closed. Silence. For the first time all morning, he allowed himself a slow breath. Not relief. Transition. At 9:14 a.m., the elevator descended past mirrored walls and executive floors toward the lobby. Then his phone vibrated. "Unknown number, Washington, D.C. area code." Brent answered calmly. "Brent Hughes." "Mr. Hughes," the voice said. "This is Nathan Pierce from Whitestone's Board Restructuring Committee." Brent listened quietly. "We reviewed the complete evidence package at 6 o'clock this morning." The elevator continued downward. Floor numbers blinking slowly above the doors. "We need to meet immediately," Nathan continued. "When in 1 hour, where?" "The Langham, Chicago. Private Executive Suite." Brent looked at his reflection in the elevator mirror. Recently terminated employee, cheap winter coat, old briefcase, corporate outcast. "What's this regarding?" he asked. A pause followed. Then Nathan Pierce answered carefully. "The future leadership of Whitestone Freight Systems." The elevator doors opened into the lobby. Across the marble floor, Brent could see employees upstairs through the towering glass atrium windows. Tiny figures moving behind polished corporate architecture. Most of them believed they had just watched a quiet man lose everything. What they did not know was that Whitestone's board had spent the entire night deciding who would replace the people who fired him. The Langham, Chicago stood 12 blocks north of Whitestone headquarters, wrapped in cold gray glass beside the river. At 10:26 a.m., Brent Hughes stepped through the hotel entrance carrying his old leather briefcase while snow melted slowly across the shoulders of his dark coat. Nobody looking at him would have guessed he had just been fired. Nobody looking at him would have guessed he was walking into the most important meeting in Whitestone Freight Systems history. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. Business executives crossed marble floors, carrying phones and winter gloves while quiet piano music drifted from somewhere near the restaurant lounge. A woman in a charcoal suit approached him immediately. "Mr. Hughes, yes. This way, please." No wasted words. She escorted him toward a private elevator requiring keycard access. Brent noticed security standing discreetly near the corridor entrance. Not hotel security. Corporate. Legal. Prepared. The elevator opened onto the 22nd floor. Private executive suites. Silence. Thick carpeting absorbed footsteps as the woman led him toward double walnut doors at the end of the hallway. She stopped there. "They're waiting inside." Brent adjusted his grip slightly on the leather briefcase, then entered. 5 people sat around a long conference table overlooking the frozen Chicago River below. Nathan Pierce stood first. Mid-50s, silver hair, precise posture. Former banking executive turned Whitestone board member. Mr. Hughes, Nathan said, "Thank you for coming." Brent nodded once. Seated beside him was Evelyn Carter, already reviewing documents across 3 organized folders. At the far end sat Arthur Callahan, chairman of Whitestone Freight Systems, 71 years old, tired eyes, hands clasped tightly together. 2 additional board members remained silent near the windows. No one offered coffee. No one attempted small talk. That told Brent everything. This meeting had already moved beyond discussion. Nathan gestured toward the empty chair. "Please." Brent sat carefully and placed his briefcase beside the table. Nathan began immediately. At 6 a.m. this morning, the board reviewed the evidence package provided through outside counsel. He slid several documents across the table. Highlighted transfers, vendor registrations, approval chains. Brent recognized every page. Nathan continued, "We hired independent forensic analysts overnight." Arthur Callahan finally spoke, voice rough and quieter than Brent expected. "They confirmed the payment structures are real? Not alleged? Real." Evelyn opened another folder. 3 shell vendor networks, she said. At least $14 million in manipulated freight reimbursements across 4 years. Nathan added calmly, "Potentially more." The room remained still. No outrage. No dramatics. Only consequences. Brent noticed something else too. No one questioned his credibility anymore. That stage had already passed. Arthur Callahan rubbed slowly at one temple. "I built this company over 30 years, he said quietly. "And somehow this happened underneath us." Evelyn answered without sympathy. "It happened because executives stopped fearing oversight." Silence followed again. Outside the windows, snow drifted slowly between skyscrapers along the river. Nathan leaned forward. "We believe Derek Holloway orchestrated the approval structures." Brent listened carefully. "Tyler Grant participated through rebate manipulation and layered reimbursements." Nathan continued. "Rachel Whitmore appears involved in retaliation against internal reporting." Brent said nothing. Nathan studied him for a moment. "You're remarkably calm for someone terminated an hour ago." Brent folded his hands quietly. "Termination was expected." Arthur looked up slowly. "You knew I knew they were accelerating." The chairman exchanged a long glance with Evelyn Carter. Then Nathan spoke again. "What you may not fully understand is the scale of risk Whitestone now faces." He slid another report across the table. Bank Covenant Exposure Analysis. SEC Investigation Probability. Client Retention. Threat Model. Numbers everywhere. Loss projections. Liquidity stress forecasts. Nathan tapped the report once. "If this breaks publicly before containment, Whitestone could lose its credit facilities within 72 hours. Arthur Callahan stared toward the windows. "Our lenders already requested clarification this morning," Evelyn added coldly. "And if federal investigators conclude executive fraud occurred during board awareness delays, shareholder litigation becomes catastrophic." Brent reviewed the documents silently. Most men reacted emotionally when power structures collapsed. He reacted procedurally. "What containment measures exist?" he asked. Nathan answered immediately. "Very few." The honesty in the room mattered. Nobody here was pretending anymore. Arthur finally straightened in his chair. "Mr. Hughes," he said carefully, "I owe you an apology." Brent looked at him. "You reported concerns through proper channels. Those channels failed." The old chairman's voice carried genuine exhaustion now. "I should have seen it earlier." Brent nodded once. Not accepting, not rejecting, just acknowledging. Nathan clasped his hands together. That brings us to the real reason for this meeting. The room quieted further. Even the city outside seemed distant now. Nathan continued. Arthur Callahan informed the board this morning of his intention to resign effective immediately. Arthur did not object, did not defend himself. He simply looked old. Whitestone's founder had spent decades building a logistics empire, only to watch executives hollow it out beneath polished quarterly reports. Evelyn slid another document across the table. Board Resolution Draft. Brent read the heading silently. Appointment of interim chairman. His expression did not visibly change, but Nathan noticed anyway. The board voted unanimously, he said. We want you to assume emergency leadership authority effective today. The room remained silent after the sentence landed. Outside the windows, a tour boat moved slowly through broken ice below the bridges. Brent looked down at the resolution again. Most men would have reacted instantly: shock, disbelief, triumph. Brent asked one question instead. Why me? Arthur answered this time. Because everyone else in that building was performing. The old chairman leaned back heavily. You were the only person protecting the company instead of protecting yourself. Silence. Nathan spoke carefully. You understand the systems. You documented evidence legally. You maintained procedural integrity despite retaliation. Evelyn added, and importantly, federal counsel will view your involvement favorably. Practical reasoning, not inspirational nonsense. Brent respected that more. He looked again at the board resolution. Interim chairman and acting executive authority. Power arrived strangely sometimes. Not through ambition, through survival. What authority would I have immediately? Brent asked. Nathan almost smiled. Everything. Another silence followed. Brent thought briefly about the operations floor upstairs at Whitestone. Tyler laughing near the sales bullpen. Rachel speaking softly about organizational trust. Derek warning him about consequences. All of them still believed the structure belonged to them. They had no idea it was already collapsing beneath their feet. Brent finally looked up. If I accept, he said calmly, there are conditions. Nathan nodded once. Go ahead. No public spectacle. Evelyn raised an eyebrow slightly, meaning no revenge theatrics, no media leaks, no humiliation campaigns. Nathan listened carefully. Brent continued. Independent forensic audits begin immediately. Executive access freezes happen legally. Lower-level employees cooperating with investigators receive protection. Arthur watched him closely now. The old chairman looked almost relieved. And Brent added quietly, all actions remain documented. Evelyn Carter closed her folder slowly. That, she said, might be the most reassuring sentence spoken in this room all morning. Nathan extended the resolution across the table. Then we have an agreement. Brent signed carefully. One signature, black ink, no ceremony, no applause, just consequence becoming official. At 11:43 a.m., Evelyn's phone vibrated against the conference table. She glanced at the screen, then looked toward Brent. There's one more thing. What Evelyn turned the phone slightly toward Nathan Pierce. A photograph filled the screen. Colorful balloons, cheap champagne bottles. Employees gathered inside Whitestone's 26th floor break room. A large sheet cake sat on the table beneath a handwritten banner, Good Luck Brent. Tyler Grant stood in the center holding a champagne bottle like a trophy. Several employees were laughing. Nathan frowned. What exactly is this? Evelyn's expression hardened slightly. Apparently, she said your coworkers are throwing a party to celebrate your firing. For the first time all morning, the room became completely still. Arthur Callahan stared at the photograph in disbelief. Brent looked at it quietly. No anger crossed his face, only recognition. The board had just handed him the company. And upstairs at Whitestone, the people who destroyed themselves were opening champagne. At 12:34 p.m., the 26th floor break room at Whitestone Freight Systems looked less like a corporate office and more like a cheap retirement party. Plastic gold balloons hung unevenly across the ceiling tiles. Half the letters in the paper banner tilted sideways because someone had used weak tape. 2 folding tables were pushed together beneath fluorescent lights and covered with grocery store snacks, supermarket vegetable trays, and melting ice buckets filled with champagne bottles. Some employees laughed too loudly. Others checked over their shoulders before joining in. Nobody wanted to appear cruel, but nobody wanted to stand apart either. That was how office culture worked. Cowardice became teamwork if enough people participated together. Tyler Grant stood near the center of the room, holding a champagne glass, while several sales employees gathered around him. "I'm telling you," Tyler said loudly, "the guy treated freight invoices like nuclear launch codes." Laughter followed. Tyler smirked and pointed toward the cake. White frosting, blue lettering. "Enjoy retirement, Brent." "He probably filed compliance reports against the bakery, too," Tyler added. More laughter. Near the coffee machines, Rachel Whitmore smiled carefully while speaking with 2 HR coordinators. "We truly tried to support him," she said softly enough to sound compassionate. "But eventually, certain personalities become disruptive." One coordinator nodded immediately. Rachel lowered her voice further. "Honestly, I think he stopped understanding how people work." The sentence spread exactly how she intended. Not openly vicious. Worse, respectable cruelty. Across the room, Derek Holloway stood near the window speaking quietly with regional operations managers. Unlike Tyler, Derek never became loud. That was not his style. He preferred control to performance. One manager raised a nervous question. "You really think compliance won't escalate anything after this?" Derek adjusted his cuff calmly. "There is no escalation." "But if Brent documented theories?" Derek interrupted smoothly. He lacked context. The manager looked uncertain. Derek noticed immediately. "Look around," he said quietly. The room buzzed with celebration behind them. No one is worried except him. The manager forced a smile. That was the thing about men like Derek Holloway. They built confidence the way magicians built illusions, by controlling where people looked. At 12:48 p.m., Tyler climbed onto a chair holding his champagne glass high. "Speech," someone shouted. Tyler grinned. "Oh, absolutely." Several employees gathered closer while phones quietly recorded. Tyler cleared his throat dramatically. "Today," he announced, "we celebrate something truly beautiful." Scattered laughter. The end of 20 years of compliance terrorism. More laughter now. Tyler pointed toward Brent's empty desk visible through the break room doorway. "You know what I'll miss most?" he asked. "Those exciting conversations about invoice formatting." Even Derek smiled faintly at that one. Tyler continued, "Seriously, though, I almost respect Brent Hughes. Imagine dedicating your entire life to becoming the human embodiment of cold oatmeal." A woman near accounting laughed into her drink. Someone opened another champagne bottle. The cork exploded loudly against the ceiling tile. At the edge of the room, Sophia Bennett stood near the vending machines, holding untouched sparkling water. She did not laugh. Rachel noticed. "Lighten up, Sophia," Rachel said warmly. Nobody died. Sophia forced a weak smile, but her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway outside, toward the elevators, toward the growing sense that something felt wrong. Downstairs, black sedans pulled quietly beneath Whitestone's covered entrance. At 12:57 p.m., Brent Hughes stepped out of the first vehicle beside Nathan Pierce and Evelyn Carter. Snow blew sharply between the downtown buildings. Corporate security officers stood nearby, speaking into earpieces. Not Whitestone employees. Independent contractors retained by the board less than 2 hours earlier. Brent looked up toward the mirrored tower above them. 26 floors, thousands of windows. Most people inside still believed he had lost everything. Nathan adjusted his coat against the wind. "You sure you want to walk into this immediately?" Brent held the leather briefcase at his side. "Yes." Evelyn glanced toward the entrance doors. We can delay until legal containment is fully prepared. No. Nathan studied him carefully. This could become ugly. Brent looked through the glass lobby toward the elevators beyond. They already made it ugly. Nobody argued with that. Inside the building, Luis behind the security desk nearly dropped his coffee when he saw Brent enter flanked by board representatives and corporate counsel. His eyes widened immediately, then widened further when he noticed the security team behind them. Nathan Pierce handed him temporary authorization credentials. Board directive, Nathan said calmly. Luis nodded quickly. Yes, sir. As they crossed the marble lobby floor, Brent noticed employees staring openly now. Whispers spread instantly. Phones appeared. Something had shifted. People sensed it before understanding it. The executive elevator opened automatically after Nathan used a restricted board access card. Inside the elevator, silence settled heavily. Evelyn reviewed messages on her phone. Nathan watched the floor numbers climb. Brent stood quietly between them. No speech, no dramatic preparation, only focus. At floor 14, Evelyn finally looked up. Security has already frozen remote executive transfers, she said. Nathan nodded. IT is waiting for your authorization upstairs, Brent answered simply. Not yet. Nathan frowned slightly. You want to wait? I want everyone in one room first. Evelyn watched him carefully now. Understanding, not revenge, containment. That difference mattered. At floor 21, Tyler's laughter echoed faintly through the elevator shaft when the doors briefly opened for another employee who quickly stepped back after seeing the group inside. Recognition spread across the woman's face instantly. Brent recognized her from procurement. Fear followed immediately afterward. The doors closed again. At floor 26, the elevator opened into the executive corridor. The operations floor beyond remained noisy with celebration. Music now. Someone had connected a speaker. Tyler's voice carried loudly through the hallway. And honestly, if Excel's spreadsheets became human, laughter exploded again. Nathan Pierce looked toward Brent. Unbelievable. Evelyn's expression hardened into something colder. This level of exposure liability alone is catastrophic. Brent began walking, steady pace, same pace he used every morning entering work. The group moved through the executive corridor together. Corporate security followed several steps behind. As they approached the break room entrance, the sound became clearer. Glasses clinking, employees laughing, someone shouting, another toast. Brent stopped outside the frosted glass doors. Through the blurred glass, he could see moving silhouettes and raised champagne bottles. Tyler stood elevated near the center of the room again. Rachel near the tables. Derek beside the windows, speaking calmly while everyone else celebrated around him. Nathan looked disturbed. They actually organized this after terminating you. Brent's eyes remained fixed on the glass. Yes. Inside the room, Tyler raised his glass once more. To Whitestone finally becoming productive again, cheers erupted loudly. Then Brent heard one final sentence through the door. Guys like Brent always think silence makes them dangerous. Tyler laughed. But honestly, nobody even noticed him until he got fired. The room burst into laughter. Outside the doors, the hallway fell completely still. Corporate security waited silently behind them. Nathan Pierce looked toward Brent, carefully now, waiting. Brent adjusted his grip on the worn leather briefcase. Then he placed one hand calmly against the door handle and pushed it open. The break room went silent before anyone fully understood why. Tyler Grant still stood on the chair, holding his champagne glass midair, when Brent Hughes stepped through the doorway. Behind Brent came Evelyn Carter, then Nathan Pierce, then two unfamiliar corporate security officers in dark gray jackets. The silence spread slowly across the room like cold water. Someone near the snack table lowered their phone. A plastic fork hit the floor. Tyler blinked, once confused more than alarmed. "Well," he said with a nervous laugh look, "who came back for severance cake?" A few weak chuckles followed automatically. Nobody else seemed certain how to react. Brent stood just inside the doorway holding the same worn leather briefcase he had carried for years. Snow still melted slowly along the shoulders of his dark coat. Nothing about him looked different. That made the moment worse. Rachel Whitmore recovered first. Her smile returned instantly polished and careful. "Brent," she said warmly, "this is unexpected." Evelyn Carter stepped forward. Before Brent answered, "Yes," Evelyn replied calmly, "I imagine it is." Now people noticed the legal folders in Evelyn's arms. The security officers, Nathan Pierce. Recognition started moving through the room in fragments. Board member, corporate counsel, security. Not normal. Derek Holloway straightened slowly near the windows. For the first time all day, his expression lost clarity. Only slightly. But Brent noticed. Derek's eyes moved from Nathan Pierce to the security officers and finally back toward Brent. Calculating, rebuilding, searching for structure. Tyler climbed down from the chair, awkwardly still holding the champagne glass. "What exactly is this?" he asked. Nathan Pierce ignored him completely. Instead, he addressed the room. "Everyone remain where you are for the moment." No one moved. The fluorescent light suddenly felt too bright. Cheap party decorations hung crookedly above employees who no longer looked certain they belonged there. Rachel attempted another smile. "I think there may be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," Evelyn interrupted. "Simple, flat." The room fell silent again. Brent looked around slowly. Half-eaten cake, plastic champagne cups, his name written across the banner behind them. "Good luck, Brent." Tyler followed Brent's gaze and suddenly seemed aware of the room for the first time. The decorations no longer looked funny. They looked dangerous. Derek stepped forward calmly. "Nathan," he said carefully, "perhaps we should continue this privately." "No," Nathan replied immediately. The answer landed hard. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. Employees stared openly now. Phones disappeared quietly into pockets. Nobody wanted evidence of being associated with whatever this had become. Evelyn Carter opened one of her folders. Then she removed a single document embossed with Whitestone's corporate seal. "I will make this brief," she said. Her voice carried clearly through the frozen silence. As of 11:32 a.m. today, Whitestone Freight Systems Board of Directors voted unanimously to remove executive operational authority from Derek Holloway pending forensic investigation. Nobody breathed. Tyler stared blankly. Rachel's face lost color. Derek remained still. Only his eyes changed. Evelyn continued. "Effective immediately, Arthur Callahan has resigned as chairman of Whitestone Freight Systems." A woman near accounting whispered, "Oh my God." Nathan Pierce stepped beside Brent. "By formal board resolution." Evelyn said Brent Hughes has been appointed interim chairman and acting executive authority of Whitestone Freight Systems. Silence. Real silence this time. No movement, no laughter. Only the faint hum of fluorescent lighting and distant traffic 30 floors below. Tyler looked at Brent as though his brain had stopped processing correctly. Then he laughed once, short, disbelieving. "Okay," he said. "That's funny." Nobody joined him. Tyler's smile weakened. "You're serious," Nathan Pierce answered coldly. "Completely." Rachel looked directly at Brent now, trying to read him. Trying to understand how the quiet man she terminated 2 hours earlier was suddenly standing beside the board. Brent gave her nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. That unsettled her more than rage would have. Derek finally spoke. "What exactly are the allegations?" Evelyn turned another page inside the folder. "Executive fraud, financial misconduct, retaliation against protected reporting activity, destruction of compliance evidence, and conspiracy to manipulate vendor reimbursements." The words hit the room like falling concrete. Several employees visibly stepped backward. Tyler looked toward Derek immediately. Instinct. Panic searching for leadership. Derek remained composed externally, but Brent noticed his left hand tightening once beside his sleeve. Tiny detail. Enough. "This is absurd," Derek said calmly. "We'll let investigators determine that," Evelyn replied. Nathan Pierce nodded toward the security officers. "No one leaves until initial directives are completed." Rachel finally found her voice again. "You can't seriously conduct legal actions in front of employees." Evelyn looked at her directly. "You conducted a retaliatory termination in front of them this morning." Rachel went silent. Brent stepped forward for the first time. Not aggressively, not dramatically. He simply walked toward the center table where the untouched cake still sat beneath the banner. Employees moved aside automatically. He placed the old leather briefcase down carefully. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Click. The brass locks opened. Then Brent removed 3 thick folders and laid them neatly across the table. Executive Review, Forensic Summary, Access Modifications. Tyler stared at the labels like they were explosives. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. Brent finally spoke. His voice remained calm. "Before anyone says anything else, understand this." The room listened. Everything presented to the board was documented legally through internal systems archived records and independent verification. No emotion, only structure. Brent opened the first folder. Inside sat printed invoices, routing logs, deletion histories, and approval records marked with timestamps. He slid several pages toward Nathan Pierce, then several more toward Evelyn. Nobody else touched the documents. Not yet. Tyler swallowed visibly. Rachel looked toward Derek again, still searching for reassurance. Derek gave none. Brent continued quietly. The reimbursement network, tied to Midwest Transit Solutions, processed approximately $14 million through layered vendor structures. He placed another page onto the table. Approval authorizations originated from executive override credentials. Another page. Deleted invoice histories were reconstructed through AtlasNet archive logs. Another. HR retaliation actions occurred within 37 minutes of compliance escalation. Rachel's face drained further. Around the room, employees stared at her now. Not Brent. Her. That shift mattered. Tyler suddenly stepped forward aggressively. "This is insane," he snapped. "You're accusing people based on spreadsheets." Brent looked at him calmly. "No." He slid a reimbursement approval across the table. "I'm accusing you based on your signature." Tyler froze. The room did too. His name sat clearly visible across the approval line. T. Grant, approved reimbursement $742,000. Tyler's mouth opened slightly, closed again. Derek stepped forward immediately. "This meeting is over," Nathan Pierce answered without raising his voice. "No, Derek." Then corporate security moved quietly into position behind him, not touching, just present. For the first time all afternoon, Derek Holloway looked genuinely uncertain. Small cracks now, tiny fractures spreading beneath polished executive control. Brent closed the final folder slowly. Then he looked around the room once more, at the decorations, the champagne, the banner. Employees who had laughed 30 minutes earlier now stood frozen beside paper plates and untouched cake. Most of them had believed Brent Hughes was weak because he remained quiet. They had confused restraint for helplessness. Brent finally spoke again. "No one is being publicly accused without evidence," he said calmly. "That's why the evidence comes first." Then he looked directly at Derek Holloway. "And we're only getting started. Nobody touched the cake anymore." The break room, that had sounded loud and careless 20 minutes earlier, now felt airless under the fluorescent lights. Employees stood frozen beside folding tables and paper plates, while corporate security quietly blocked both exits. Outside the glass walls, word had already begun spreading across the 26th floor. People slowed near the hallway. Phones vibrated. Managers appeared near cubicles pretending to look busy while staring toward the break room. Inside, Brent Hughes remained standing beside the table with the evidence folders open neatly before him. No raised voice, no performance, only documents that frightened people more. Nathan Pierce stepped slightly aside while Evelyn Carter organized several printed exhibits into clean rows across the table. Wire transfers, vendor registrations, approval records, deletion logs. The room slowly transformed from a party into a hearing. Tyler Grant looked trapped between anger and panic. "This is insane," he said again, though quieter now. "No," Evelyn replied calmly. "It's traceable." She slid a reimbursement report toward him. Tyler glanced down. His signature authorization appeared highlighted in yellow beside 6 separate consulting reimbursements tied to Midwest Transit Solutions, amounts ranging from $200,000 to nearly $1 million. Tyler's face tightened immediately. "I approved what operations gave me." Derek Holloway finally moved forward. "This discussion requires counsel." "You have counsel," Evelyn answered. "You're looking at her." The sentence landed coldly. Rachel Whitmore crossed her arms tightly. "You can't ambush executives like this in front of staff." Nathan Pierce turned toward her. "You terminated a protected whistleblower 3 hours after evidence reached the board." Rachel opened her mouth, stopped. Brent noticed the exact second she realized the board already knew about the HR timeline. Fear looked different on different people. Tyler became louder. Rachel became quieter. Derek became still. Brent opened the second folder carefully. AtlasNet archived all executive authorization histories. Automatically, he said. Several employees watched him now with stunned expressions. Not because of the evidence, because Brent sounded exactly the same as he always had. Same measured voice, same calm posture. No triumph, no revenge. That unsettled them deeply. Brent removed another document. This reimbursement chain originated through 4 shell vendors, registered in Delaware and Nevada. He placed the pages side by side. 3 shared identical routing destinations. The 4th routed through a secondary account tied to Holloway Freight Consulting. At the far end of the room, one accounting employee whispered, "That's Derek's brother-in-law." Derek's eyes shifted instantly toward the voice. The employee looked down immediately. Too late. Everyone had heard it. Brent continued without reacting. The shell companies processed layered freight reimbursements, small enough to avoid automatic audit triggers. Nathan Pierce looked toward several employees gathered near the back wall. For everyone's understanding, he said calmly, this was designed intentionally to appear operationally normal. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Outside the break room windows, snow drifted slowly past the Chicago skyline. Inside, Brent turned another page. "This is the deletion timeline from yesterday morning." He handed copies toward Nathan and Evelyn. 3 archived invoices removed from AtlasNet at 8:03 a.m. through executive administrative credentials. Derek spoke immediately. "You can't prove who used those credentials." "No," Brent agreed calmly, "but I can prove where." That changed the room again. Brent slid another page across the table. VPN terminal logs, building access timestamps, remote authentication data. The printed records aligned neatly across the paper like machine-cut lines. The approvals originated from an executive remote terminal while you were physically inside Whitestone headquarters, Brent said. Derek's expression hardened. Tyler looked toward him instinctively again, still searching for direction, still expecting control. Evelyn Carter stepped forward next. Additionally, she said, "We recovered evidence of attempted retaliation against Mr. Hughes after his compliance escalation." Rachel Whitmore straightened immediately. That accusation is ridiculous. Evelyn handed Nathan another folder. Your HR department generated 6 disciplinary complaints against Brent Hughes within 9 days. Rachel spoke quickly now. Employee concerns were submitted internally. By whom? Evelyn asked. Rachel hesitated. Too long. Evelyn answered for her. 3 complaints originated from employees who later denied writing them. Silence crashed across the room. One HR coordinator near the wall visibly stepped backward. Rachel noticed immediately. So did everyone else. Brent watched quietly as the structure around them weakened piece by piece. Not dramatically, systematically. That was how real collapses happened. Tyler suddenly slammed his champagne glass down onto the table hard enough to spill liquid across the documents. This is bullshit, he snapped. Corporate security moved immediately, not aggressively, just closer. Tyler looked around the room wildly now, at employees, at Derek, at Rachel. Nobody defended him, because survival had entered the room, and survival changed loyalties quickly. Derek finally spoke again, voice lower now. What exactly does the board think this accomplishes? Nathan Pierce answered calmly. It prevents further damage. You're destabilizing the company publicly. No, Brent said quietly. Now everyone looked at him again. The fraud destabilized the company. The sentence settled heavily over the room. Brent continued. For 4 years, Whitestone's internal systems were manipulated to hide executive reimbursements and shell vendor payments. He glanced toward the party decorations still hanging above them. Then when the evidence surfaced, retaliation began. Rachel looked pale now, Tyler angry, Derek unreadable. Brent reached into the final folder. Here's the problem, he said calmly. You assumed deleting records would erase timelines. He removed several printed screenshots. Atlas Net recovery archives, timestamp restorations, deletion sequences, system override alerts. Brent placed them onto the table one by one. Systems remember behavior, he said, and behavior creates patterns. No one interrupted him now. Even Tyler stayed silent. At the edge of the room, Sophia Bennett watched everything with wide, exhausted eyes. Brent noticed her hands trembling slightly around the untouched water bottle she still carried. Nathan Pierce turned toward corporate security. Freeze executive system credentials immediately. One officer spoke quietly into his earpiece. Across the operations floor beyond the glass walls, monitors suddenly began locking out. Employees looked around in confusion. Executive access disabled. The first visible sign that control had changed hands. Rachel saw it too. You're doing this now, she asked quietly. Yes, Nathan replied. Derek reached into his pocket for his phone. One security officer stepped forward. Sir, leave the device on the table. Derek stared at him, long enough to test the boundary, then slowly placed the phone down. Tyler looked genuinely frightened for the first time. This can't be legal. Evelyn Carter almost smiled. It's extremely legal. Brent closed the final evidence folder carefully. The sound echoed softly beneath the fluorescent lights. Click. Finished. Not emotionally, procedurally. Around him stood employees who had spent years underestimating him because he spoke quietly, dressed plainly, and avoided office politics. They had mistaken visibility for authority. Meanwhile, Brent had spent years learning how systems failed and how people exposed themselves while believing nobody was watching. Nathan Pierce looked toward Brent. What's your next directive, Mr. Chairman? The title changed the room instantly, Mr. Chairman. Several employees visibly reacted to hearing it aloud for the first time. Brent looked around slowly, at the cake, the balloons, the crooked farewell banner still hanging above them. Then toward Derek Holloway. Separate executive access immediately, Brent said calmly. Outside investigators begin interviews today. He looked toward Tyler. All reimbursement approvals are frozen pending forensic review. Then Rachel, HR retaliation records are preserved under legal hold. Nobody argued. Nobody laughed anymore. Outside the break room, the operations floor buzzed with spreading panic as locked systems, security movement, and whispered rumors rolled through Whitestone headquarters floor by floor. Inside the room, Brent Hughes remained exactly what he had always been: quiet, patient, precise. The only difference now was that everyone finally understood how dangerous that could become. By 2:15 p.m., Whitestone Freight Systems no longer operated like a normal corporation. It operated like a building under containment. Across all 34 floors, executive accounts locked simultaneously. Password resets failed. Shared drives disappeared behind legal access barriers. Internal messaging channels flooded with confused questions from managers who suddenly could not open financial reports or authorize vendor payments. Employees felt the change before they understood it. Systems controlled modern companies more than executives did, and someone had just taken the systems away. On the 26th floor, 2 IT administrators moved quickly between departments carrying encrypted laptops, while corporate security remained positioned near executive corridors. Nobody laughed anymore. The farewell party still sat abandoned inside the break room, half-empty champagne glasses, melted ice, a ruined cake no one touched. The banner reading, "Good luck." Brent now looked almost obscene, hanging above legal evidence folders and frozen employees. Brent Hughes stood near the operations windows, reviewing updated reports with Nathan Pierce and Evelyn Carter. Outside, gray snow clouds rolled across downtown Chicago. Inside, Whitestone's leadership structure was collapsing in real time. An IT supervisor approached, carefully holding a tablet. "Mr. Hughes." Several nearby employees visibly reacted again at the title. Mr. Hughes looked different from Brent. Chairman sounded even heavier. The supervisor swallowed. "We completed executive credential freezes. Derek Holloway attempted remote access twice from a secondary device." Nathan looked up sharply. "Blocked." "Yes, sir," Brent answered calmly. "Preserve all login attempts." The supervisor nodded immediately and hurried away. That was another thing people noticed now. Nobody interrupted Brent anymore. Not because he spoke louder, because authority had finally aligned with competence. Near the elevators, Derek Holloway sat alone at a temporary holding table with one corporate security officer nearby. His phone remained confiscated pending legal review. Tyler Grant occupied another conference room down the hall. Rachel Whitmore another. Separated. Controlled. No communication. Standard containment procedure. The same people who spent years controlling Whitestone now waited for permission to speak inside their own building. At 2:42 p.m., the first outside investigators arrived. 3 forensic accountants from Grant and Mercer Advisory Services entered carrying locked hard cases and audit equipment. Behind them came 2 federal regulatory consultants retained by the board overnight. Employees watched silently from cubicles. Some looked frightened, others relieved, most simply confused. Brent met the investigators near the executive conference corridor. Lead forensic auditor Daniel Keene shook his hand firmly. "We'll need full server image and access. You'll have it." "Any limitations?" "None," Brent replied. Then after a pause, "Except employee medical files and protected personal records unrelated to the investigation." Keene nodded once. Professional answer, controlled, not reckless. That mattered. As the investigators moved deeper into the building, whispers spread through operations. Federal auditors, forensic teams, executive freezes. People began realizing this was not an internal disagreement anymore. This was survival. At 3:10 p.m., Sophia Bennett sat alone near accounting, reviewing invoices with trembling hands when Brent approached quietly. She looked up immediately, almost startled. "You helped preserve records," Brent said. Sophia hesitated. I copied some fuel adjustment reports after they started deleting files. You did the right thing. She laughed nervously once. Honestly, I thought I was going to lose my job. Brent looked toward the operations floor where employees now spoke in low voices beside darkened executive accounts. You still might, he said honestly. Sophia blinked, then unexpectedly smiled slightly. Okay, she admitted. That actually sounds more trustworthy than HR ever did. Brent almost smiled himself. Almost. He placed a legal notepad beside her desk. Write down everything you noticed. Dates if possible. No assumptions. Only facts. Sophia nodded immediately. Facts. That word had become oxygen inside Whitestone. At 3:38 p.m., Evelyn Carter entered the temporary command conference room, carrying another stack of reports. We have a problem. Nathan looked up from the table. What kind? Potential debt exposure. The room quieted instantly. Brent took the folder. Inside sat documents tied to Whitestone's revolving credit facilities with First National Commercial Bank. Large numbers highlighted in red, loan covenants, revenue certifications, operational compliance requirements. Then Brent saw it. One vendor contract linked directly to debt ratio calculations, fraudulent revenue inflation. The room became colder. Nathan leaned forward slowly. How bad? Evelyn answered carefully. If manipulated contracts affected covenant calculations, the bank could technically freeze portions of Whitestone's credit line. Nathan cursed quietly under his breath. That finally got Brent's attention. Nathan Pierce almost never showed emotion. Brent reviewed the contracts carefully. Then another detail appeared. Several freight projections had been artificially inflated to support expansion borrowing 6 months earlier. Fake operational growth. Real debt obligations. Sophia Bennett's copied fuel report suddenly mattered even more now. The fraud was not just theft, it was structural. At 4:02 p.m., one of the forensic accountants entered quickly. Mr. Hughes. Brent looked up. We recovered deleted archive fragments from AtlasNet. What did you find? The accountant hesitated slightly. Evidence of active file purge instructions issued yesterday evening. Nathan frowned. By who? The accountant handed over a printed access log. Administrative override authorization. Rachel Whitmore's credentials. Time issued 7:46 p.m. The room went silent. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. She tried destroying retaliation records. Brent studied the timestamps quietly. Again, too rushed. Fear accelerated mistakes. At 4:30 p.m., a junior operations manager knocked carefully on the conference room door. Sitter Brent looked up. The manager shifted nervously. There are rumors federal agents are coming. Not currently, Brent replied. The manager visibly relaxed. Then Brent added, but outside investigators are conducting a formal forensic review. The manager nodded quickly. Should employees be worried? Brent thought briefly before answering. Only if they intentionally participated. The manager left looking pale. Nathan watched the closed door. You realize panic is spreading through the building. Yes. You seem remarkably calm about it. Brent looked toward the evidence covering the conference table. Wire transfers, deletion logs, fraud structures, years of hidden behavior exposed through numbers. Panic doesn't change records, he said. At 5:14 p.m., another discovery arrived. A forensic analyst entered carrying reconstructed server backups. We found an additional contract hidden under archive procurement folders. Brent reviewed the file immediately. His expression changed slightly for the first time all afternoon. Nathan noticed. What Brent turned the contract around. Fraudulent debt restructuring approvals tied directly to Whitestone's primary bank covenants. False revenue certifications, backdated executive approvals, amounts exceeding $42 million. Nathan stared at the pages. Oh, God. Even Evelyn looked shaken now. This could trigger immediate lender intervention. Brent read deeper into the contract silently. Then he noticed the timestamp. Uploaded 36 hours earlier. Recent. Very recent. Not old fraud. Ongoing fraud. Derek Holloway had still been moving money while Brent was being terminated. Nathan leaned heavily against the conference table. How long before the bank notices? Evelyn answered quietly. If they haven't already, maybe 72 hours. Brent looked through the conference room glass toward the darkening operations floor outside. Employees moved nervously between cubicles, while investigators copied servers and security officers monitored executive hallways. Whitestone was still standing, but now Brent understood something dangerous. The fraud inside the company was larger than reimbursement theft. If the debt manipulation surfaced publicly before containment, Whitestone itself might collapse. Not metaphorically, financially, completely. And somewhere down the hallway, Derek Holloway already knew it. At 6:07 p.m., snow hammered against the windows of Whitestone Freight Systems, while panic began moving through the financial markets outside. Not publicly, not yet, but pressure had started. Inside the temporary command room on the 29th floor, Brent Hughes stood beside a conference table covered in debt reports, forensic summaries, and legal binders, while 3 screens displayed live operational data from across Whitestone's freight network. The building had grown quieter as evening settled over Chicago. Most employees had been sent home early. Only investigators, IT staff, legal teams, and essential operations personnel remained. The farewell party downstairs had already been dismantled by maintenance, but the smell of spilled champagne still lingered faintly in the breakroom carpets. Nathan Pierce entered quickly, holding his phone. "We have movement." Brent looked up. "From who, Derek?" Evelyn Carter turned immediately from her laptop. What kind of movement? Nathan placed the phone onto the conference table. A financial news alert filled the screen. Whitestone Freight faces possible internal investigation, sources claim. Another alert followed seconds later. Unconfirmed reports suggest liquidity concerns inside major Midwest logistics firm. Evelyn's expression hardened instantly. He leaked it. Nathan nodded grimly. Someone fed partial information to 2 business reporters. Brent read the alert silently. Incomplete details, strategic wording, just enough uncertainty to trigger fear, not enough clarity to stop speculation. Classic pressure tactic. If lenders panic before controlled disclosure, Nathan said quietly, we could lose access to operating liquidity by Monday. Outside the conference room, investigators moved quickly between offices carrying sealed evidence containers. The entire building now operated under emergency rhythm. Fast voices, faster decisions. Brent continued reading the reports, then he looked toward Evelyn. "How quickly can we brief the banks?" "We already started," she answered. "But if markets move first, narrative control becomes harder." Nathan rubbed both hands across his face tiredly. "Derek knows exactly where the pressure points are." "Yes," Brent said calmly. "He built them." At 6:21 p.m., one of the IT administrators hurried into the room carrying a tablet. "Mr. Hughes, what is it?" "We detected attempted external downloads from a restricted backup server 15 minutes ago." Nathan looked up sharply. From inside the building, remote access attempt routed through an external VPN. Brent extended his hand. "Show me?" The administrator turned the screen. Unauthorized credential attempt. Executive level legacy access. Source terminal masked through multiple relays. But one detail remained visible. Recovery email linked to Derek Holloway's secondary authentication profile. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "He's trying to pull internal financial records." "Or destroy them," Nathan added. Brent handed the tablet back. "Lock all legacy administrative channels immediately." The administrator nodded and left quickly. Nathan stared toward the dark windows overlooking downtown Chicago. This could spiral fast. Brent remained still for several seconds. Then he opened a folder near the center of the table. Inside sat several documents Nathan had not yet reviewed. Controlled disclosure timelines, emergency lender briefing schedules, contingency operational statements. Evelyn noticed first. "What is that?" Brent answered simply. "Preparation." Nathan frowned slightly. "You already drafted crisis responses yesterday." Silence. Evelyn looked directly at him now. "You expected this?" "I expected escalation." Nathan stared down at the organized packets, detailed timelines, legal sequencing, bank communication structures, internal employee guidance, everything prepared before the board even appointed him chairman. The realization changed the room slightly. Not because Brent had predicted danger, because he had prepared for it quietly, while everyone else underestimated him. Nathan picked up one document, Emergency Creditor Disclosure Framework. "This is good," he admitted quietly. Brent said nothing. Outside the conference room, snow thickened over the city while freight trucks continued moving across Whitestone's national routes, completely unaware that the company operating them stood inches from collapse. At 6:48 p.m., Evelyn's phone rang. She answered immediately. "Yes." The room listened silently. Then her expression shifted, not panic, calculation. When she asked, another pause, "I understand." She ended the call. Nathan looked at her immediately. "Bank, yes. They know not everything. But they received inquiries from market analysts after the leak." Nathan cursed softly again. How bad Evelyn looked toward Brent. "They want direct leadership clarification tonight." Nathan stared at the table. That fast, they're protecting exposure. Brent already understood the real issue. Banks feared uncertainty more than fraud. Fraud could be quantified. Uncertainty spread infinitely. "We brief them tonight," Brent said calmly. Nathan looked up. "You think that stabilizes this?" No, Brent answered, "but delay guarantees instability." The room fell silent again. Brent opened another prepared folder. Inside sat updated operational cash flow summaries and route continuity projections. No inflated numbers, no manipulated vendor data, real figures. That was the difference now, reality instead of performance. At 7:15 p.m., Derek Holloway finally requested legal counsel formally through security. Nathan looked toward Brent. "Do you want to authorize external communication?" Brent considered briefly. "Yes, but monitored." Nathan nodded once. Even now, Brent noticed something important. Derek still believed leverage remained. That meant he still had something planned. At 7:32 p.m., another problem arrived. Sophia Bennett entered the conference room, clutching a printed report tightly. Her face looked pale. "I think I found something else." Brent motioned for her to continue. Sophia laid the papers onto the table. "These freight expansion projections from 6 months ago," she said nervously. "The revenue assumptions don't match actual route capacity." Nathan scanned the pages, then looked up sharply. Jesus. The projected growth supporting Whitestone's debt expansion had been fabricated almost entirely. Artificial volume forecasts, inflated route utilization, fake long-term contracts, not just reimbursement fraud, institutional fraud. Brent reviewed the numbers carefully. Then one line caught his attention. Projected operating growth certified by D. Holloway. And beneath it, reviewed by Executive Finance Committee. Nathan sat down heavily. If lenders conclude the expansion package itself was fraudulent, they can trigger covenant acceleration. Evelyn finished quietly. Meaning immediate repayment pressure, meaning catastrophe. The room darkened further as evening settled across Chicago. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Brent closed the report calmly. "We move now?" Nathan looked up. How Brent pointed toward the prepared disclosure framework, controlled disclosure, immediate lender briefing, independent audit cooperation, full operational continuity assurances. Nathan blinked once. You think that's enough? No, Brent replied honestly. But panic becomes fatal if leadership hesitates. That sentence stayed in the room because everyone understood what he meant. Derek Holloway had spent years controlling Whitestone through confidence, intimidation, and appearances. But Brent Hughes controlled differently, through preparation. At 8:04 p.m., the emergency lender call began. Large banks joined remotely from New York, Chicago, and Charlotte. Legal teams connected, board representatives assembled. Brent sat at the head of the conference table for the first time as acting chairman. No expensive suit, no performance voice, just his dark coat hanging beside the chair and stacks of verified documents organized in exact rows before him. Nathan watched quietly as Brent began speaking. No panic, no exaggeration, only facts. Whitestone identified material executive misconduct tied to reimbursement structures and financial reporting. Brent said calmly, independent forensic review is active. Operational continuity remains stable. Freight movement nationwide continues without interruption. Simple, clear, measured. The lenders listened carefully. Questions followed. Brent answered everyone directly. No evasions, no corporate language, and slowly, almost invisibly, the temperature inside the room changed. Not safe, but stable enough to survive the night. At 9:11 p.m., after the final lender disconnected, Nathan leaned back heavily. You may have just saved this company. Brent looked through the conference room windows toward the dark Chicago skyline. Snow still falling, lights stretching endlessly beyond the river. No, he said quietly. I just stopped it from dying today. Monday morning arrived with freezing rain and silence. Not ordinary office silence, controlled silence. The kind that settled over buildings after disaster passed through, but before anyone fully understood the damage left behind. Whitestone Freight Systems reopened under emergency oversight at 6 a.m. Corporate investigators still occupied multiple floors. Outside legal counsel moved between conference rooms carrying sealed boxes of records. IT specialists monitored restored systems around the clock while temporary compliance protocols locked down executive approvals across every division. But the company was still operating. Freight still moved. Drivers still crossed interstate highways carrying medical equipment, frozen cargo, and manufacturing supplies across the Midwest. That mattered. Brent Hughes arrived before sunrise. Same silver Ford Fusion. Same dark wool coat, same worn leather briefcase. The only visible difference was the temporary executive badge clipped beside his belt now. Acting chairman. The security guards downstairs stood straighter when he entered. Lewis gave a small nod. Morning, Mr. Hughes. Morning. No performance. No congratulations. Brent preferred it that way. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt unfamiliar. Not because of the office, because of how people reacted now. Employees lowered their voices when he passed. Managers stepped aside in hallways. Several workers looked embarrassed simply making eye contact. Respect born from fear always carried an uncomfortable smell. At 6:18 a.m., Brent entered the chairman's office for the first time alone. Arthur Callahan had already cleared most personal belongings over the weekend. The office looked almost sterile now. Large windows overlooking the river, dark walnut desk, leather chairs, framed photographs removed from walls leaving faint outlines against the paint. Brent placed his old briefcase beside the desk carefully, then stood silently looking out across downtown Chicago. Snow drifted between skyscrapers while headlights crawled through morning traffic below. 2 days earlier, he had been terminated inside a glass conference room downstairs. Now the same executives who fired him sat under legal review, Strange how quickly power changed shape. At 7:05 a.m., Nathan Pierce entered carrying updated operational reports. Overnight freight continuity held, he said. No lender escalation yet. Brent nodded once. Employee response. Nathan exhaled slowly, confused, nervous, a lot of resignation concerns. Brent looked through the reports quietly. Then he asked, how many lower-level employees are directly implicated? Nathan understood immediately. Not many. Pressured mostly. Brent closed the folder. That matters. At 8 a.m., Whitestone held its first full employee briefing since the executive collapse. The main operations auditorium filled slowly with several hundred employees from logistics, finance, dispatch, accounting, and operations. Nobody spoke loudly. The atmosphere carried the exhaustion of people who had spent the weekend watching careers, reputations, and assumptions collapse simultaneously. Sophia Bennett sat near the middle row, clutching a legal notepad against her chest. Tyler Grant's chair remained empty. Derek Holloway's empty too. Rachel Whitmore's HR team occupied an isolated section near the back wall, avoiding eye contact with everyone. At exactly 8:12 a.m., Brent walked onto the stage beside Nathan Pierce and Evelyn Carter. No music, no applause. Brent stood behind the podium for several seconds before speaking. The room became completely still. I'm not going to give a motivational speech, he said calmly. Several employees blinked in surprise. Good. Honesty reset rooms faster than charisma did. Brent continued. Whitestone is under active forensic review. Several executive actions are being investigated. Independent auditors and legal teams are cooperating fully. No corporate language. No inspirational slogans, just facts. Employees listen differently now. Not because Brent spoke dramatically, because people sensed truth when performance finally disappeared. We are not shutting down operations, Brent said. Payroll continues. Freight operations continue. Client contracts continue. Visible relief spread quietly through parts of the room. Fear about jobs had become heavier than gossip by now. Brent rested both hands lightly against the podium. Most employees inside this company did not create these problems. That sentence mattered. People visibly relaxed again, but some people ignored them, Brent added calmly. The room tightened once more. Going forward, that changes. Brent outlined new policies clearly, independent compliance channels, anonymous reporting protections, multi-level approval transparency, mandatory audit retention, no executive override authority without external review logging, practical changes, real systems, not speeches about culture. Sophia Bennett listened carefully from the middle row. So did everyone else, because for the first time in years, Whitestone sounded like a company trying to operate honestly instead of merely appearing successful. At 8:41 a.m., the briefing opened for questions. The first employee stood nervously near the back. What happens to the executives under investigation? Brent answered evenly. The legal process happens. No revenge, no promises. Another employee raised a hand. Did people know this was happening? The room grew quieter again. Brent considered briefly before answering. Some people suspected pieces of it. He glanced toward the accounting section briefly. Very few people understood the scale. Sophia lowered her eyes immediately. Brent did not expose her. That mattered too. Near the back row, one of Rachel Whitmore's HR coordinators slowly raised her hand. Her voice shook slightly. I signed some disciplinary reports because I was instructed to. Silence. Every eye in the room shifted toward her. Brent answered calmly. Cooperation matters now more than silence. The woman nodded quickly, almost relieved. The meeting ended without applause. Again, better that way. As employees filed slowly out of the auditorium, several people approached Brent awkwardly. Not dramatic apologies. Worse, corporate guilt. A logistics supervisor cleared his throat nervously. I should have spoken up earlier. Brent nodded once. A procurement analyst followed. I laughed at some things Tyler said. Another employee admitted quietly, I thought you were paranoid. Brent accepted each statement the same way. No emotional speeches, no comfort, just acknowledgement. People revealed themselves eventually without pressure. At 10:26 a.m., Brent walked through the now empty break room where the party had happened Friday afternoon. Maintenance removed the balloons. The cake was gone, but faint tape marks still clung to the walls where the Good Luck Brent banner had hung. One forgotten champagne stain remained near the sink counter. Brent stood silently for several seconds, then noticed something left on one of the tables, a printed photograph. Someone had uploaded a picture from the party to social media before everything collapsed. Tyler laughing, Rachel smiling, champagne glasses raised, the farewell banner visible behind them. Timestamp, 12:41 p.m., 20 minutes before Brent walked through the door as chairman. Nathan entered quietly behind him. You keeping that? Brent looked at the photograph again. No. He placed it face down onto the table. Nathan studied him carefully. You're handling this better than most people would. Brent looked around the empty break room. Plastic celebration decorations already forgotten. Temporary cruelty preserved forever in photographs. My father worked rail yards for 32 years, Brent said quietly. Nathan remained silent. He used to say weak men become cruel the moment they feel safe. The room stayed quiet. Then Brent adjusted the cuff of his coat slightly and walked toward the hallway. Outside, Whitestone still carried scars from the weekend. Investigators still moved between floors. Fear still lived inside conversations. But for the first time in years, the company was finally being forced to face itself honestly. And Brent Hughes intended to keep it that way. 3 months later, Whitestone Freight Systems still carried scars. But it was alive. That alone surprised people. Most corporate collapses happened quietly at first. Credit lines tightened, clients drifted away, vendors stopped trusting payment schedules. Then suddenly an entire company disappeared behind bankruptcy filings and disconnected phone numbers. Whitestone had come dangerously close to that edge. Now the company operated under permanent independent oversight agreements, revised lending structures, and mandatory federal compliance review. Profit margins remained thinner than before, but the numbers were real now. Real numbers stabilized better than manipulated success ever did. On a freezing Thursday morning in March, Brent Hughes arrived at headquarters before sunrise. 6:03 a.m., same as always. The city remained dark beyond the river, while snow flurries drifted between office towers under pale blue streetlights. Downtown Chicago had not fully awakened yet. That was one reason Brent preferred mornings. No performances, no noise. The lobby security guards greeted him differently now. Not because he demanded it, because people treated titles differently than character. Morning, Mr. Chairman, Louis said. Brent nodded once. Morning. He still carried the same old leather briefcase. Employees noticed that. People noticed small things more after power changed hands. Several executives had quietly expected Brent to transform after becoming chairman. New suits, luxury watches, private car service, corner office ego. Instead, Brent still drove the same silver Ford Fusion with Russ near the rear wheel. Still drank black coffee from the third floor machine because he preferred the taste. Still wrote notes by hand during meetings. That unsettled certain people more than authority itself. At 6:22 a.m., Brent entered the chairman's office and immediately opened operational reports from overnight freight divisions, Denver routes, Detroit delays, cold storage metrics from Milwaukee. Real work, not image management. Nathan Pierce entered 10 minutes later carrying updated legal summaries. Federal prosecutors finalized preliminary filings yesterday, he said. Brent looked up. Nathan placed the folders down carefully. Derek Holloway accepted partial cooperation terms. Brent read the first page silently. Wire fraud exposure, financial conspiracy, evidence tampering. Tyler Grant had entered negotiations separately through private counsel. Rachel Whitmore faced civil liability tied to retaliatory employment actions and destruction of protected records. Nathan watched Brent quietly. No reaction. Brent closed the folder. The reaction happened months ago. That was true. The emotional part of collapse arrived first. The legal part simply moved slower. At 7:15 a.m., Brent attended the weekly operational recovery meeting with division managers. The atmosphere felt different now. Still tense sometimes, but cleaner. Managers discussed actual problems instead of hiding them behind performance language. A logistics director openly admitted fuel forecasting errors during Midwest winter routes. Nobody panicked. Nobody punished honesty. That mattered more than motivational speeches ever could. Sophia Bennett now sat 3 seats from Brent as newly promoted Senior Financial Compliance Coordinator. Her desk had moved out of the accounting bullpen weeks earlier. She still looked slightly uncomfortable during executive meetings, probably healthier that way. At one point during the meeting, a route manager hesitated before admitting projected delivery targets would be missed due to weather delays. Brent simply asked, "What's the realistic recovery timeline?" The manager blinked once, then answered honestly, not defensively. That difference changed organization slowly from the inside. At 9:40 a.m., Brent walked through the 26th floor operations department alone. Employees still grew quieter when he passed, but no longer out of fear entirely, more out of awareness. The building understood now that systems mattered, documentation mattered, small decisions mattered. Near the old sales bullpen, 2 analysts argued quietly over vendor coding procedures. One stopped immediately when Brent approached. "Sorry, sir." Brent looked at the screen briefly. "You flagged the reimbursement mismatch." "Yes." "Good." Then he kept walking. Simple, direct. The analyst stared after him in silence. Because under previous leadership, discovering problems created danger. Now hiding problems created danger instead. At 11:15 a.m., Brent left headquarters unexpectedly and drove west through Oak Park beneath cold gray skies. Snow lined the cemetery roads in uneven banks beside leafless trees. Leonard Hughes had been buried there 8 years earlier, former railroad mechanic. 32 years working freight systems across Illinois rail corridors, hands permanently scarred from steel couplings and winter machinery repairs. Brent stood quietly beside the gravestone carrying a small brass railroad pin inside his coat pocket. No dramatic speech, no tears, just silence. Wind moved softly through bare branches overhead. The gravestone remained simple. Leonard Hughes, 1948 to 2018. Work hard. Stay honest. Brent brushed snow carefully from the engraved letters with one gloved hand, then placed the brass railroad pin beside the flowers, already frozen lightly under ice. His father never trusted loud men, said they usually compensated for something. Growing up, Brent remembered long drives in old pickup trucks while Leonard explained freight systems, union politics, and machine failures with the same calm patience. Everything breaks eventually, Leonard once told him beside a rail yard outside Joliet. The trick is noticing the sound before the collapse. Back then, Brent thought he meant engines. Now he understood differently. At 12:42 p.m., Brent returned downtown. Whitestone headquarters rose above the river ahead like a steel mirror against the winter sky. 3 months earlier, employees inside that building celebrated his termination with champagne and cheap cake. Now Derek Holloway awaited sentencing hearings. Tyler Grant no longer appeared on company websites. Rachel Whitmore's professional certifications were under review. And Whitestone still stood, not because Brent destroyed anyone, because he refused to let the company keep lying to itself. At 1:30 p.m., Brent reviewed quarterly stabilization metrics with Nathan Pierce inside the executive conference room. Operational losses had slowed. Client retention improved. Several lenders restored limited confidence agreements after successful independent audits. Nathan looked over the reports quietly. You know, he said, most people in your position would have cleaned house aggressively. Brent signed several approval documents calmly. Fear creates quieter employees, he replied, not better systems. Nathan almost smiled. That should probably be framed somewhere. Brent ignored the comment. Outside the conference room, Windows afternoon sunlight finally broke weakly through the clouds over Chicago. The city looked cleaner under winter light, sharper. At 5:58 p.m., most employees had already gone home when Brent walked once more through the old break room on 26. It looked completely ordinary again now. Fresh paint, clean counters, no decorations, no champagne. But Brent still remembered exactly where Tyler stood holding the glass, exactly where Rachel smiled, exactly where everyone laughed. Memory attached itself to places more stubbornly than people admitted. He looked around quietly for several seconds, then shut off the break room lights and stepped back into the hallway. Tomorrow morning, Whitestone would continue again. Freight routes, audits, meetings, real work. Not dramatic endings. Just systems rebuilt slowly by people finally forced to see clearly. And for Brent Hughes, that was enough. The annual shareholder meeting took place on a cold April morning beneath clear Chicago skies. 6 months earlier, Whitestone Freight Systems had stood on the edge of collapse. Now the company's stock had stabilized. Federal oversight remained active. Independent auditors still reviewed quarterly operations. Several lawsuits continued moving through the courts, but the company survived. That mattered more than public image ever would. At 7:02 a.m., Brent Hughes arrived at the downtown conference center, carrying the same worn leather briefcase that employees once mocked openly. The leather near the handle had cracked further during winter. He still used it anyway. Outside the building, black sedans lined the curb while shareholders, legal representatives, and transportation analysts crossed the plaza beneath sharp morning wind. Nathan Pierce walked beside Brent toward the entrance. You know, Nathan said quietly, investor confidence reports specifically mention your leadership style now. Brent adjusted his coat slightly against the cold. That sounds unfortunate. Nathan laughed once. You still hate attention. It usually hides something. Inside the conference hall buzzed with controlled corporate energy. Projector screens displayed Whitestone branding above the stage, while financial reporters arranged cameras near the rear seating area. Shareholders gathered around coffee stations discussing freight recovery numbers and regulatory outcomes. Several people recognized Brent immediately now. They stepped aside automatically as he passed, not because he demanded status, because stories traveled fast in corporate America, especially stories involving executive fraud, boardroom collapse, and a man quietly fired hours before becoming chairman. Brent ignored most of it. Attention changed very little about actual work. At 7:38 a.m., he entered the backstage preparation room where Evelyn Carter already reviewed final legal briefing materials. You're officially boring now, she said without looking up. Brent paused. That sounds positive. It is, Evelyn replied. 3 quarters ago, Whitestone was one federal subpoena away from financial cardiac arrest. She handed him updated shareholder summaries. No surprises today. Investors want stability. Brent glanced through the numbers calmly. Real revenue growth, controlled debt restructuring, transparent operational forecasting. Nothing inflated, nothing hidden. The company looked smaller than before, but healthier. Nathan entered moments later carrying another folder. The board vote finalized this morning. Brent looked up. Nathan extended the signed resolution. Permanent chairman appointment confirmation. Unanimous approval. Brent read the page silently for several seconds, then closed the folder again. No smile, no dramatic reaction. Nathan watched him carefully. You really did expect this to feel bigger, didn't you, Brent considered honestly. No. That answer stayed in the room quietly. Because becoming chairman had never been Brent's goal. Surviving the truth had been. At 8:15 a.m., the annual meeting officially began. Shareholders filled the main hall beneath bright stage lighting, while financial analysts opened laptops across long conference tables. Whitestone's new quarterly numbers appeared on the giant projection screens overhead. Lower profit margins, stronger liquidity positioning, improved compliance ratings. The audience listened differently now, not excited, trusting. Trust moved slower than excitement, but lasted longer. Nathan Pierce opened the meeting formally before introducing Brent as permanent chairman of Whitestone Freight Systems. Applause followed. Professional, measured. Brent walked to the podium, calmly. He looked almost exactly like he had 6 months earlier. Same plain dark suit, same careful posture, same quiet presence. Only now people listened before he spoke. Brent rested both hands lightly against the podium. For the past 6 months, he began calmly. Whitestone has operated under independent review while rebuilding operational integrity. No flashy language, no victory speech. Several investors exchanged glances immediately. They had expected polished corporate theater. Instead, they received numbers, operational restructuring details, audit reforms, vendor transparency protocols, freight continuity improvements. Brent spoke the same way. He always had clear, precise, without unnecessary performance. And strangely, that worked better now than charisma ever would have. At one point during the presentation, a transportation analyst raised a question from the audience. Mr. Hughes, how do you prevent executive abuse from happening again? The room quieted. Important question. Brent answered immediately. You don't rely on personalities. Several people looked surprised. You build systems where records survive pressure. He continued calmly. You create oversight that functions even when leadership fails. No applause followed, only note-taking, which Brent preferred. Later, another shareholder asked carefully, would you describe the company culture before the investigation as toxic? Brent paused briefly, then answered with characteristic honesty. I'd describe it as performative. The room listened closely. People became rewarded for visibility instead of accuracy. He continued. That eventually damages judgment. Several executives in attendance shifted slightly in their seats. Good. The truth usually felt uncomfortable before useful. At 10:42 a.m., after the final financial presentations ended, the meeting adjourned into smaller executive discussions and media briefings. Brent stepped away from the stage quietly, while reporters gathered near Nathan Pierce for official comments. Sophia Bennett approached carrying updated compliance folders. She looked far more confident now than she had months earlier, standing terrified near the accounting printers. You handled the investor questions well, she said. Brent accepted the folders. They asked reasonable questions. Sophia hesitated slightly, then smiled. You know, people tell stories about you in the building now. That sounds dangerous. She laughed softly, mostly about the party. Brent said nothing. Sophia's smile faded slightly. I still can't believe they actually did that. Neither could many employees. The story had spread through Whitestone like permanent folklore. The executives who celebrated a quiet man's firing hours before discovering he owned their careers instead. Brent looked toward the conference hall windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. People usually become cruel when they think consequences disappeared. he said quietly. Sophia nodded slowly. At 12:05 p.m., Brent returned to Whitestone headquarters after the shareholder meeting concluded. The building looked calmer now, cleaner, real. He rode the elevator alone to the 26th floor. The old operations department remained busy with ordinary work freight schedules, vendor reviews, weather delay updates. No champagne, no office politics performances, just work. Brent walked slowly toward the former break room. Construction crews had finished renovations 2 weeks earlier. The room looked completely different now. Fresh walls, training displays, compliance reporting stations, digital ethics review terminals mounted near the entrance. Above the doorway hung a simple plaque, Whitestone Operations Training Center. No mention of what the room used to be. No memorial to humiliation. Only purpose. Brent stepped inside quietly. Several employees participated in compliance certification training near the back tables. They looked surprised seeing him there. One young operations analyst stood nervously. "Sorry, Mr. Hughes, we can clear the room if you need." No, Brent interrupted calmly. The employee sat back down immediately. Brent walked slowly through the room. This same space once held cheap champagne and laughter, celebrating his downfall. Now it trained employees how to prevent fraud and retaliation. That felt more useful than revenge ever could. At 6:11 p.m., after most employees left for the evening, Brent finally returned upstairs to the chairman's office. Sunset burned orange across the Chicago skyline, beyond the windows. He placed the old leather briefcase carefully beside the desk once more. Then he opened the top drawer and removed Whitestone's newly signed ethics charter. Independent oversight, protected reporting systems, mandatory audit preservation, real accountability. Brent signed the final approval page quietly, then rested the pen beside the document while the last sunlight faded slowly across the city. Months earlier, people laughed because they believed quiet men had no power. They were wrong. Quiet men simply understood something louder. People often forgot. The truth did not need noise, only time. Sometimes the most dangerous mistake people make is assuming silence means weakness. Brent Hughes never fought for attention. He never tried to dominate rooms, impress executives, or win office politics. He simply paid attention while everyone else performed. And in the end, facts outlived arrogance. A lot of people watching this story probably know what it feels like to be underestimated. Maybe you were the quiet employee nobody noticed. Maybe people mistook your patience for fear or your restraint for helplessness. But real strength is often invisible at first. It shows itself later through preparation consistency and the ability to stay calm while everyone else loses control. If you've ever stayed quiet while people judged you wrong, comment your experience below. I read those stories carefully, and honestly, they're often more powerful than the videos themselves. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story is about a mechanic everyone mocked for years, until the night a billionaire's private jet stopped working in the middle of a storm.